Wow, slap the diddly do, Marties. How you guys all doing today? Hope you're doing wonderful. How are you guys doing? Hope you're all doing great. I've got a little tip for you dudes today about reverb. Reverbing your drums. And I know you're thinking, can I really trust a man on the internet who wears sunglasses inside? And the answer is yeah. So, a little tip for reverbing drums, because I thought it could be a cool tutorial and helpful to some, as I was thinking about what can I say on the internet to people. And I don't think I've really discussed this topic in detail so much yet, or at least not for a long time anyway. And I had a couple of situations with some students as well. Big ups to my patron supporter and student Vexer, Jeff, absolute legend from the States, and he inspired this video a little bit because I was working through some drums with him and there was so much reverb going on. And another subscriber asked a question also about how do I clear out mid-range mud, and I thought I'd put two and two together, and that's what we were doing on the lesson by basically getting rid of some of the reverb on the drums, because that was actually what was clogging up the mix. So when it comes to should I reverb my drums or not, that is a question that depends. The answer really depends. So yes and no. What you're really implying when you're talking about reverbing your drums is you're talking about the level of depth on your drums. So yeah, so you have to think about how much depth do you want on your drums as a whole, how much depth do you want on the individual parts of your drums, and obviously reverb is going to create more depth, but the balance will always be is that the more reverb you use and the more depth you apply, the more space it will take up in your headroom, in your mix down. Okay, so you can easily, and people do this all the time, go overboard with reverb and reverb things too much and then lose a lot of space in your mix, and that's often one of the number one causes for an unclear muddy mix, is the overuse of reverb. So do I reverb my drums? Yes, but again it depends on how and why and where I'm trying to achieve depth in my drums. So I don't really I don't have like a whole reverb send for my whole drums. Okay, I'm going to show you like a short little tip at the end of this video. I'm actually going to do something on Logic to show you how I do a bit of parallel reverb, and you can probably guess a little bit already. But the main point of the story is I get all of the depth and yes, sense of space and nice stereo parts to my drums individually, in the usually through the actual sample selection that I'm using. So when I look for drums, I look for a kick that has a bit of depth to it. I look for a snare that has a bit of depth to it. I look for hi-hats that have a bit of depth to them, and they technically, when I'm looking for the depth, it's like a short little burst of almost like a room sound on the kick, snare and hi-hat, and so it's not like a long reverb that I'm wanting on drums. If you want to have your drums sounding like you're in a cathedral, like sounding like you're in a church, then you slap on a reverb and you have this really long tail on your drums, but in practicality that's not really very clever or useful for drum and bass. Unless it's very, very quiet and in the background and just in the high end, then you can have this kind of long reverbs. But or if you're trying to exaggerate a certain effect, like doing a Phil Collins tom fill, and you want this like over the top reverb sound on it, then that's cool. But in terms of like keeping a clean, polished, professional sounding mix, I try to avoid those big, overly long reverbs on any of my drums, and I just look to have a nice balance of depth on the individual groups or layers within my drums. So my kick, I won't like a kick if it's completely dry. If I've made it in kick 2 or something like that, it's not often so much of a natural space on it. So I tend to opt for kick samples that already have that built-in sort of natural room sound on them. But if I don't have that and I'm using a dry kick, then I'll layer in like an acoustic kick drum that has a bit of natural room sound on it, you know, nice and tight and controlled. Same applies to my snare. You know, if I found a snare that's really, really punchy and snappy and tight, but it's just quite dry and there's nothing to it, I'll splash a little bit of depth onto it very gently with a bit of white noise or a clap or something like that. But yeah, I'm peppering in little bits of depth into the samples, or finding ones that already have that on, so they've got a bit of a room sound to them, but it's not like a mega long reverb, you know. Same thing applies for your hats and things like that. Yeah, I like hats. I don't want them completely sharp and dry with nothing, but I don't want them with like a long reverb on either. So I just want to feel like the sort of little short overhead reverb on the samples, you know. So when it comes to reverbing drums, all of the real stereo reverb and room sound is actually, for me, usually really, really short, tight and controlled, and is more often than not already found in the sample which I've selected to use for the drums, because that's just the quickest and easiest way to achieve that, you know. And then I don't put like a send on the whole drums for extra reverb. Yeah, so typically speaking, okay, there's always exceptions to the rule, right? There might be times when you want to like have an overly reverby effect, but like if I'm making, you know, modern current drum and bass where the mix down has to be spot on, my drums will tend to be fairly dry, in the sense that they don't have big long reverbs on at all, but the individual samples have enough of a stereo room sound to make them sound realistic and not artificial. So that's like how I do my sort of balancing of that. And then let's take it a step further, because this is how I do apply some global reverb to the whole drum group, okay? So if I've got my drum beat here, I'll really try to get all the drum group to sound really great and natural with that like nice stereo edge and room sound on it already in the project, in the channels, you know? And I could be happy with it as it is. But when I go into my stem mixing and mastering, because I even in my own tracks, I'll bounce out stems and do like a stem mix and master on my own song, you know? So what I do is I'll bounce out oftentimes my whole drum group, and then I'll do some stem processing on it. And here sometimes I'll add like a parallel reverb send, which is essentially, as you see here, I take my whole drum beat, I copy it over to a new channel, and then I put 100% convolution reverb on, and then I mix it back in. But again, I'm sort of doing a really, really tight one. So yeah, the main drum sound is like this. And the reverb I'm adding in just sounds like this on its own. So it's really, really short and tight, and it's been processed a lot and turned down a lot. And so this is basically, it's not, because I don't want this like massive sound of big reverby drums like I'm in a church. The reason that I'm applying a global reverb is actually to fill out the spectrum more, add some new harmonics, and fill out the mix more in a tight and controlled way. So it's more the generation of the new harmonics that I can pepper in on top in the high end to lift up the whole drum group, to give it an extra energy. That's the reason that I do the reverb. I'm not, and it does add a bit of depth as well, sure, but I'm not actually applying like a whole massive long reverb just for the sake of reverbing the drums, you know. So I don't like to do that, you know. So how I do that though is you know, we've got the same drum sample just on a new channel, and then we've got to put 100% reverb on, and you can flick through different ideas with convolutions. Here I chose the white blur 200 milliseconds. Yeah, sounded quite nice. It's got enough length to it that you can definitely hear it in the background, but it's not super long either. Like it is a really, really tight one in the grand scheme of things. I've just adjusted the tone, made it a little bit brighter. And important, you must have the mix on 100%, because otherwise you're blending dry signal with dry signal, and then that's the whole minefield, you know? There's no point in doing that. And obviously the mix is high, all the way at 100, you know, obviously the volume is going to be high at this point, but we process the sound and then we turn it down and mix it into the background, you know, because it has to be mixed into the background. But we start high so we can hear what we're doing. So next I just EQ out some low end, and you can do it already listening to with your original as well if you want. So obviously it's a bit mental right now. I do a bit of transient shaping because it's that's a great way you can sort of make the reverb even tighter if you need. So taking the sustain down a bit, and you can kind of hear like how it sounds in the background and how much you're sort of like allowing, how much content you're going to allow for in the background. Sculpting out a bit more low end, again EQing, I'm always doing gently, one stage at a time, slowly refining the sound. So taking a bit more low, and then I've done another little bit of transient shaping, bit more sustain coming out. You can start to hear the real fundamentals of the main dry kick and snare being a lot clearer to hear now, which is wonderful. And then a final EQ again, another big chunk of low end coming out. Because remember, it's really only in the high end where we actually have this freedom for extra content, especially at this part of the processing right at the end of the track. You know, I'm really just squeezing in a tiny bit more juice in the high end where there is room. There isn't really much room in the mid-range anymore once the song's nearly finished, you know. So a little bit more, and I can really hear the power of the kick and snare from the original not being phased, you know. So that's wonderful. And then I just simply turn it down. I believe I had it -6 or -8. I can't remember exactly, but somewhere around there. It's best then to re-add in the whole of your mix and then mix it into the global mix, and you'll get a better sense of how much space you've got left in your mix to add that reverb in. But yeah, this is how and when and the only time that I really ever add a global reverb to my drums, and it's more of like a little mixing and mastering trick that I do right at the end. But I don't ever do, you know, on my whole drum group, I don't ever do something like putting a reverb on it, like even the chrome reverb or whatever, and making this big like church reverb long stuff on there, because it just quickly eats up loads of headroom. So I don't reverb the drums globally, to be honest. Just a little bit of that parallel trick that I showed you before, but the rest of the drums, how they are on their own, and any reverb that's in them is purely coming from basically the sample selection, or occasionally I'll pepper in a tiny bit of convolution reverb on the snare or on the kick if it needs it, if it's really too dry. But I keep them pretty nice and dry, the drums usually, you know. So yeah, that's basically, yeah, that's just how I do my drums. Now, of course, like you can like go crazy with reverb and do drums. There's no rules in music. Do whatever you like. But I often find that from trying to help people improve their mix downs, that often something that will hold you back is clouding your mid-range with too much reverb. That's one of the like things that comes up time and again. So that's my tip for some more beginner intermediate producers is don't feel like you have to reverb your drums, and try and do it in a nice and controlled way, and be careful of how much reverb signal really truly does clog up the headroom in your mix down. And that's just one of the most easy and honest pieces of advice I can give to help you hopefully with your mixing for your drum and bass tracks and your electronic music tracks. Because yeah, here on this channel I believe that mixing knowledge, stuff like this, like things that I've had to learn the hard way, should be freely accessible to anyone. So I'm willing to share all of this mixing knowledge that I know, because the real fun part of music is getting creative, doing cool sound design and coming up with cool compositions and doing cool stuff. And it's the technical mix down stuff that I don't think that should be like, you know, shielded from public, you know, view. Like the knowledge, I think that knowledge should be freely available to everyone, so that we can get over that hurdle of like the mix down problems, like get really good at mixing, and then spend more time on the creative side. You know, that's my goal with this channel anyway, you know. So hopefully that helped you guys out a little bit. If you are not subscribed and you're new here, please do subscribe, because it helps with the algorithm, and like the video as well. It helps with the algorithm so that we can get the video out to more people, so more people can have the opportunity to just debunk kind of mixing myths and like nonsense that they've learned, and so they can focus better on more easily creating a professional sounding mix down right from the beginning, and then have more spare time to focus on the fun part of making music, you know? So yeah, it really helps me when you do all you can on the channel to support the videos so that it will reach more people so we can achieve that goal and we can all have a great time making some tunes together. All right, my G's, I hope you enjoyed that video today. More from me very soon. Much love.